I worked station security for 12 cycles. But in just 3 seconds, one human woman taught me what Deathworld truly means. Look, I have been working station security for 12 cycles now, and I thought I had seen everything. Every species, every dispute, every type of stupid that sentient beings can conjure up when they are far from home and feeling bold. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day I watched 7 Korthian enforcers surround a single human female and learned what the term Deathworld really means. My name is Kelrith, and I am a Velasian, which means I have 4 arms, excellent peripheral vision, and a natural talent for reading body language across approximately 70% of known sapient species. These qualities make me extremely good at my job. Station security on Harmony Point is not glamorous work, but it is steady, it pays well, and most importantly, it is predictable. Harmony Point sits at the intersection of 3 major trade routes, which means we get everyone. Thalaxians with their crystalline exoskeletons, always complaining about the temperature. Gormath merchants who smell like fermented fruit and try to sell you things you definitely do not need. Pelian diplomats who speak in the third person and consider direct eye contact a declaration of war. Yeltrin pleasure seekers, looking for entertainment. Korthians, looking for fights. You learn to spot trouble before it starts. You learn which species do not mix well, and you learn when to step in and when to let things sort themselves out. I had a partner named Ven, a Drexian, 2 meters tall with scales that shifted color based on his mood. Right now they were a calm blue-green, which meant it was a typical day. We were doing our usual patrol through the commercial district, past the food stalls that catered to oxygen breathers, past the liquid nitrogen bar for the Crexians, past the gravity-adjusted zones for species who found standard galactic measures uncomfortable. That is when the alert came through. Human transport vessel docking at Bay 7. Estimated passenger count, 43. Ven's scales flickered yellow. Curiosity. Deathworlders, he said, like the word tasted strange in his mouth. I shrugged with 2 of my arms. They are harmless enough. Loud, yes. Overly friendly. Absolutely. But the reports say they are more interested in trade and tourism than causing problems. This was true, mostly. Humans had joined the Galactic Collective about 8 cycles ago, and they had been enthusiastically spreading throughout known space ever since. They bought things. They sold things. They asked endless questions. They took pictures of literally everything, and they had this bizarre habit of trying to pet animals that could absolutely kill them. But violent? Not really. Annoying? Frequently. Dangerous? The statistics said no. I heard they come from a Class 12 Deathworld, Ben said, his scales now showing orange streaks. Concern. Gravity 1.3 times standard. Toxic atmosphere that they somehow breathe. Megafauna that actively hunt sapients. Weather patterns that include frozen water falling from the sky. Yes, I have read the files, I said, waving one hand dismissively. But Deathworld origin does not automatically mean dangerous. The Krell come from a Class 11, and they are pacifists who write poetry. Ven made a clicking sound that meant he was not convinced, but he dropped the subject. We watched the docking bay monitors as the human ship settled into position. The airlock cycled, and then they came pouring out. Humans. Dozens of them, talking, laughing, pointing at things, taking pictures, wearing clothing in every color imaginable. They were bipedal, which was common enough. Bilateral symmetry, also common. But there was something about the way they moved. Smooth, controlled, like coiled springs wrapped in synthetic fiber and good intentions. See? I said to Ven, completely harmless. He did not respond. His scales had gone gray. That meant he was thinking. I should have paid more attention to that. The call came in about 2 hours after the human ship docked. Disturbance at the Tralvan trading post. Level 3, commercial sector. Voices raised, potential for escalation. Standard stuff. Ven and I headed over at a leisurely pace, expecting to find the usual nonsense. Someone got overcharged, someone felt disrespected, someone looked at someone else wrong, and now everyone needs to make a big theatrical production out of it before we all move on with our lives. What we found was not standard stuff. The Tralvan trading post specialized in what they politely called salvage, and what everyone else called stolen goods that cannot be traced back to their original owners. The proprietor, a Tralvan named Crix, had 6 eyes and a talent for creative pricing. Standing at his counter was a human female, maybe 1.7 meters tall with dark hair pulled back in a functional knot. She was wearing practical clothing, dark pants, a fitted jacket, and a shirt with words on it that I could not read at that distance. She was holding a small data device and pointing at Crix's display screen. "I am telling you," she said, her voice carrying that particular human accent that turns certain sounds sharp. "This component is worth maybe 200 credits on any civilized station. You are trying to charge me 800. That is not a markup. That is robbery with paperwork." Crix's eyes swiveled in different directions, the way they do when a Tralvan is feeling defensive. Human customer does not understand rarity of component. Very difficult to acquire, very dangerous. "Price is fair." "The price is ridiculous," the human said. Her tone was calm. Too calm. Like someone who has had this argument before, and knows exactly how it ends. "I can get this same part from 3 other vendors on this station for under 300. I am giving you a chance to be competitive." That was when the Corthians arrived. Now, let me tell you about Corthians. They are the muscle of the mid-rim territories, 2.5 meters tall, covered in dense gray hide that can turn away most light weapons, arms like cargo loading equipment, and a culture that values strength and intimidation above basically everything else. They work as enforcers, bodyguards, and occasionally as informal dispute resolution specialists, which is a fancy way of saying they hurt people for money. 7 of them pushed through the growing crowd. Yes, 7. Because apparently Crix had decided that this disagreement required professional intimidation, and he had called in his security contractors. The lead Corthian, who had ritual scars across his face that indicated he had killed at least 12 sentients in formal combat, looked down at the human woman. "You leave now. Merchant says you caused trouble. We remove trouble." The crowd, which had been merely curious, suddenly got very interested. Species began backing away, giving the Corthians space. This was sensible. When Corthians decide to remove someone, the process is rarely gentle and frequently involves property damage. The human woman, Mara Quinn, according to her visitor tags, did not back away. She looked up at the lead Corthian. Then slowly, deliberately, she looked at each of the other 6. Her expression did not change. Her breathing did not change. She simply looked at them the way you might look at a math problem you already know how to solve but find tedious. "I am having a conversation with the merchant," she said. "About pricing. If you gentlemen want to wait your turn, that is fine. Otherwise, I suggest you go find something else to do." Then scales went bright red. Alarm. The crowd went silent. The Corthians began to spread out, surrounding her in a loose circle. Standard intimidation formation. Cut off escape routes. Make the target feel trapped. Force compliance through overwhelming presence. Mara Quinn stood perfectly still. She did not look trapped. She looked like she was waiting for something, and I realized with a sick feeling in my stomach that she was waiting for them to make a mistake. "Then," I said quietly, "we need to intervene. Right now." But it was already too late. We pushed through the crowd, and I activated my authority projector, which made my voice carry across the entire trading post floor. Galactic security. "Everyone take 3 steps back. Corthian contractors, you are creating an unlawful impediment to free movement. Disperse immediately." The lead Corthian did not even look at me. His eyes stayed locked on Mara. "This is private security matter. Station authority not needed. We handle." "That is not how jurisdiction works," I said, moving closer. Then flanked me, his scales now strobing red and orange, which in Drexian body language basically screams danger to anyone paying attention. "You are on a galactic collective station. All disputes fall under our authority. Step back and let us mediate." 3 of the Corthians had moved behind Mara now. The other 4 formed a wall in front and to her sides. They were armed. I could see shock batons on their belts, restraint fields. Probably knives hidden somewhere. Corthians always carried knives. They were not drawing weapons yet, but the threat was obvious. This was their standard operating procedure. Surround. Intimidate. Escalate if necessary. They had done this hundreds of times before. The crowd continued to grow. I saw Thalaxians recording on their personal devices. A group of Pelian traders watched from behind a support column. 2 Gormath were taking bets, because of course they were. And in the center of it all, Mara Quinn had not moved. That was the first thing I noticed, really noticed. She had not shifted her weight, had not looked for exits, had not shown any of the normal fear responses that prey species display when surrounded by predators. Her hands hung loosely at her sides, her shoulders were relaxed, her head was level, but her eyes were moving. I have 4 eyes positioned to give me nearly 300 degrees of vision, and I use them constantly to track multiple threats. Mara had 2 eyes, forward-facing, predator configuration, and she was somehow tracking all 7 Corthians simultaneously. I watched her pupils shift, micro-movements, left then right, then back again, and I realized she was building a threat map in her head, cataloging positions, weapons, reach, probable attack vectors. This was not a civilian in over her head. This was a trained combatant assessing tactical options. "Listen," I said, keeping my voice level, "nobody needs to get hurt here. This is a commercial dispute over a component that costs a few hundred credits. Let us all act like rational beings and work this out through proper channels." The lead Corthian finally looked at me, and I saw the decision in his eyes. He had already made up his mind. The human had disrespected his employer. She had refused to back down when confronted by superior force, and now she was making him look weak in front of witnesses. In Corthian culture, this required a response, a physical one. "Deathworlder needs lesson," he said, "needs understand how things work in civilized space. We teach station security can file report after." "That is not going to happen," Ben said, his voice dropping into the subsonic range that Drexians use when they are genuinely angry. One of the Corthians behind Mara laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. 7-2. "You want piece of this? We have enough for everyone." I was calculating response options. We could call for backup, but it would take 3 minutes minimum. We could try to physically intervene, but Corthians outmassed us significantly, and while I am trained in restraint techniques, I am not trained to fight 7 of them at once. We could threaten them with legal consequences, but they clearly did not care. And then I noticed something else about Mara. Her breathing had not changed. At all. Her chest rose and fell in the exact same rhythm as when we had arrived. No acceleration. No stress response. I have seen this exactly once before, in a Thalaxian meditation master who had spent 40 years learning to control his autonomic nervous system. But Mara was not meditating. She was waiting. Her weight had shifted, so slightly, that I almost missed it. Her left foot was now half a step behind her right. Her knees had unlocked. Her center of gravity had dropped maybe 2 centimeters. Combat stance. She was in a combat stance. "Wait," I said, holding up 2 hands toward the Corthians. "Everyone just wait." The lead Corthian reached for Mara's shoulder. And that was when everything went wrong. I need to be very clear about what happened next, because when I filed my report, 3 separate supervisors accused me of exaggerating. But I have the security footage. I have Ven as a witness. I have approximately 50 bystanders who all saw the exact same thing. And I have 7 Corthian enforcers in the medical bay who will probably never take another contract on this station. It took 3 seconds. 3 seconds. The lead Corthian's hand was maybe 10 centimeters from Mara's shoulder when she moved, and I mean moved in a way that my brain could not properly process at first. Humans come from a high-gravity world, right? 1.3 times standard, which means their muscles, their reflexes, their entire evolutionary biology is calibrated for an environment that would exhaust most species after a few minutes of walking. On a standard gravity station like Harmony Point, humans are operating at about 70% of their natural weight. Mara's right hand came up and caught the Corthian's wrist, and I heard the bone break from 5 meters away. It sounded like a cargo crate splitting. The Corthian's face had not even registered surprise yet when Mara pivoted, using his own momentum and his compromised balance to throw him, a 2.5-meter-tall mass of muscle and dense hide, over her hip and into the Corthian standing to her left. 2 down. 0.7 seconds elapsed. The Corthian to her right went for his shock baton, and his hand was maybe halfway to his belt when Mara's boot hit him in the knee, a precise lateral strike that hyperextended the joint with a wet popping sound that made my stomach turn. He went down hard, and Mara was already spinning, her elbow coming around to catch another Corthian in the throat. He made a choking sound and staggered backward, hands clutching at his crushed windpipe. 4 down. 1.4 seconds elapsed. The 3 Corthians behind her were reacting now, moving forward, and this was the part that I still have trouble believing when I watch it back on the security footage. Mara dropped low, so low that she was almost kneeling, and swept the legs out from under the closest one. He went airborne, genuinely airborne, and came down on top of another Corthian with enough force that they both hit the deck plating and did not get back up. 6 down. 2.1 seconds elapsed. The last Corthian, the one who had been standing in front of her and had watched his entire team get dismantled in less time than it takes to form a coherent thought, finally got his shock baton clear of his belt. He was bringing it up, activating the charge, and you could see the electricity arcing along its length. Mara stepped inside his reach, caught his arm and did something with her hips and her shoulders that sent him flipping through the air. He rotated 180 degrees, completely inverted, and hit the ground flat on his back. The impact drove all the air from his lungs with a sound like a pressure seal failing. The shock baton clattered away across the floor, still sparking. 7 down. 3.0 seconds elapsed. And then the room went silent. Not quiet. Silent. Like someone had cut the audio feed. Every conversation, every transaction, every ambient noise just stopped. Species from a dozen different worlds with a dozen different cultural contexts all experienced the exact same reaction at the exact same moment. We had just watched apex predator behavior. Mara stood in the center of a circle of groaning, injured Corthians, and her breathing had not changed. She rolled her shoulders once, a small gesture that suggested she was loosening up, not winding down. Her eyes swept the crowd, not threatening, just observing, making sure there were no additional problems that needed addressing. Then she looked at Crix, the Tralvan merchant who had started all of this, and her expression was exactly the same as it had been before. Calm, patient, maybe slightly annoyed. So, she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a hull breach, about that component. Are we going to negotiate a fair price, or do you want to keep wasting everyone's time? Crix's 6 eyes were all focused on her now, wide and unblinking. 200 credits, he said quickly. Very fair price. Very reasonable. I package it for you now. No charge for container. That is what I thought, Mara said. She walked over to his counter, stepping carefully around the Corthians, and pulled out a credit chit. The transaction processed with a cheerful beep that sounded absolutely obscene given the context. Crix handed her a small package with hands that were visibly shaking. Thank you for shopping at Tralvan Trading Post, he said, his voice about 3 octaves higher than normal. Please come again. Anytime. Discount for return customers. Mara took her package, tucked it into her jacket pocket, and turned to face me and Ven. Officers, she said, nodding politely. I assume you will want a statement. I could not speak. My translator was working fine. My vocal cords were functional, but my brain had apparently decided that forming words was beyond its current capabilities. Ven's scales had gone pure white. I had never seen that color before. I did not know Drexians could turn that color. I managed to get my brain and mouth coordinated after what felt like an hour, but was probably only 5 seconds. Yes. Statement. Right. We need a statement. And medical teams. Several medical teams. And probably, definitely, a formal incident report. Mara reached into her jacket and pulled out an identification card, the kind with embedded verification chips that are extremely difficult to forge. She handed it to me with the same casual energy someone might use when returning a borrowed datapad. Mara Quinn, registered security contractor, licensed in 47 collective systems including this one. Self-defense clause applies when threatened by multiple armed hostiles. I am happy to cooperate fully with your investigation. I looked at the card. It was legitimate. Completely. Absolutely legitimate. She had credentials from the Collective Security Licensing Board, weapons certifications, combat training documentation, even a commendation from the Draxian Merchant Guild for protecting a convoy from pirates. You are a security contractor, I said, because apparently my brain had decided to only state obvious facts now. Yes. You just disabled 7 Corthian enforcers in 3 seconds. 3.2 seconds actually, she said. But yes, approximately. With your bare hands. Well, and my feet, Mara said. And 1 elbow strike. Proper self-defense involves using your entire body as a weapon system. Behind me I heard then make a sound like a slowly deflating atmosphere regulator. Medical teams were arriving now, loading the Corthians onto stretchers. The one with the broken wrist was conscious and whimpering. The one who had been thrown into the ground was staring at the ceiling with the expression of someone fundamentally reevaluating their life choices. The one with the crushed throat was going to need serious reconstructive work. The crowd was still watching, but the energy had changed. The other humans, the ones from Mara's transport ship, were not surprised at all. Several were smiling. One was actively laughing. A human male, tall with graying hair, pushed through the crowd and walked up to Mara. "Nice form. You pulled that last throw, though." He had at least another meter of airtime in him. "Did not want to crack the deck plating," Mara said. "Station maintenance gets annoyed when you crack the deck plating." "Fair point." Another human, a female with bright blue hair that defied several laws of biology, pointed at Mara and looked at me. "You should have read the shirt," she said, still grinning. "The shirt?" I said. She pointed again, and this time I actually looked. Mara's shirt, the one under her jacket, had words printed across the chest in clear galactic standard. "Deathworld Boxing Champion." "Boxing," I said slowly. "That is a human combat sport." "One of many," the blue-haired human said cheerfully. "Mara holds titles in 3 weight classes. You should see her in the ring." This was her being gentle. This was gentle. This was gentle. I excused myself, told Mara we would need her to come to the security office for a formal statement, and walked very calmly to the nearest duty station where I could access the security footage. Ben followed me, his scales still white. I pulled up the video feed and set it to quarter speed. At quarter speed, I could finally see what had actually happened. Every strike was precisely calculated. The broken wrist was a compliance hold that targeted the exact point where Corthian bone structure is weakest. The knee strike was angled to hyperextend without shattering. The elbow to the throat had enough force to disable but not enough to kill. The throws used leverage and momentum, not just strength. The leg sweep was positioned to avoid the Corthians hitting their heads on the hard floor. She had disabled 7 armed hostiles in 3 seconds, and she had done it without causing a single fatal injury. She had treated it like a math problem. Input, violence. Output, controlled neutralization of threats with minimal permanent damage. Kelrith then said quietly, his voice shaking, "What else do humans do for fun?" I pulled up a search query on human combat sports. Boxing, kickboxing, wrestling. Something called mixed martial arts that appeared to be all of them combined. Judo, karate, Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Krav Maga. The list went on, and on, and on. "They fight each other," I said, feeling my stomach drop. "They have entire industries built around fighting each other, for entertainment. They pay money to watch other humans hurt each other, and then they go home and practice the same techniques." "Why?" Ben asked. I did not have an answer. I spent the next hour doing research while Mara gave her statement to the incident documentation team, and with every search query I entered, my understanding of humans shifted from curious to concerned to genuinely alarmed. Humans have been fighting each other, in organized formats, with rules and referees and paying audiences, for thousands of years. Thousands. They have combat sports that date back to their ancient civilizations. They teach their children how to fight. They consider it exercise. They consider it character building. They have schools, academies, training facilities on every human world and colony. I found footage of human boxing matches. 2 humans wearing padded gloves, standing in a marked square, hitting each other in the head and torso repeatedly until one of them could not continue. The audiences cheered. They sold tickets. There were championship belts and prize money and corporate sponsorships. Then I found mixed martial arts. That was worse. Much worse. Humans grappling on the ground, applying joint locks, chokeholds, striking with fists and elbows and knees and feet. I watched one human bend another human's arm backward until it broke, and the human with the broken arm did not even cry out, just tapped the ground twice to signal submission, and then they both stood up and hugged each other. They hugged. After one of them broke the other one's arm, on purpose, for sport. "Then," I said, "are you seeing this?" Then was watching over my shoulder, his scales flickering through colors I had never seen before. "This is what they do to each other, to their own species, for recreation. There are weight classes, I said, reading the documentation. Because apparently humans come in different sizes, and they want to make sure the fights are fair. Fair. They have rules about what techniques are too dangerous to use. What techniques are too dangerous? Ben asked. I scrolled through the regulations. Eye gouging. Groin strikes in some formats. Biting. Strikes to the spine or back of the head. Small joint manipulation. So everything else is acceptable? Apparently. We sat in silence for a moment, watching a highlight compilation of something called knockout victories, which appeared to be humans hitting other humans so hard that their brains temporarily stopped working. Kelrith then said slowly, Mara did not do any of those things to the Corthians. She did not strike anyone in the head with full force. She did not break the arm, just the wrist. She controlled their falls. She could have killed them all in that same 3 seconds, and she chose not to. He was right. I rewatched the security footage again, this time looking for what she did not do. She had dozens of opportunities to strike vulnerable targets. Throats, temples, spine. Instead, she had targeted limbs and used throws that, while devastating, were specifically designed to disable rather than kill. She had been holding back. Significantly. My personal comm unit chimed. Message from the medical bay. I opened it and immediately wished I had not. All 7 Corthians were stable. 2 broken bones, 1 hyperextended knee, multiple contusions and 1 severe case of bruised dignity. But they were also traumatized. The medical report used that specific word, traumatized. The lead Corthian, the one with the broken wrist and the ritual scars indicating 12 kills in formal combat, had requested immediate psychological counseling and was refusing to leave his medical bed. 3 of them had already filed requests for emergency transport off the station. They were willing to pay breach of contract penalties, forfeit their remaining wages, anything to leave immediately. One had specifically stated he would never take another contract that involved humans. Another had asked if there were any stations in collective space that humans were not allowed to visit. The medical officer's notes included a personal observation. In 20 years of trauma medicine, I have never seen Corthian enforcers this shaken. Recommend station security update threat assessment protocols regarding human civilians. My comm unit chimed again. And again. And again. Messages were flooding in. The incident was spreading through station gossip channels faster than a hull breach. I saw at least 30 different video recordings from different angles, all showing the same 3-second sequence. Someone had already set it to music. Someone else had created a slow-motion analysis with commentary. The Pelian diplomatic delegation had filed a formal inquiry asking if humans were actually classified correctly as a Class 12 species, or if perhaps the collective had miscalculated. A Thalaxian journalist was requesting an interview with Mara. The Gormath who had been taking bets were arguing about whether the outcome counted as a valid result since nobody had predicted it would be over in under 5 seconds. Then, I said, how do we write this report? His scales had settled into a dull gray. Resignation. Very carefully, he said. Very, very carefully. The incident report took me 4 hours to write, and I rewrote it 6 times because every version sounded completely insane. Attempt 1 made it sound like I was exaggerating. Attempt 2 made it sound like the Corthians were incompetent. Attempt 3 made it sound like Mara had used illegal weapons or enhancements. Attempt 4 just said, see attached video footage, for every question, which my supervisor rejected. Attempt 5 tried to use technical combat terminology I had learned from my research, but I used it wrong and then pointed out I had accidentally described Mara as performing a maneuver that required 4 arms. Attempt 6 was the one I finally submitted. It stated the facts clearly, included timestamps, referenced Mara's legitimate credentials, attached the complete security footage from 4 angles, and included witness statements from 17 different species, all corroborating the same impossible sequence of events. I added one personal note at the end: recommend updating station threat assessment guidelines to reflect that human civilians with combat training should be treated with the same caution as armed Corthian enforcers, possibly more. My supervisor approved it with a single comment. Agreed. Also, what in the name of the founders are they teaching people on that planet? Before Mara left the station, I found her in the departure lounge, sitting with a group of other humans and drinking something that smelled toxic. Coffee, according to the label. A stimulant beverage that would probably put most species in the medical bay, but that humans apparently consumed multiple times per day. Miss Quinn, I said, approaching carefully and making sure all 4 of my hands were visible and non-threatening. I wanted to thank you for your cooperation with the investigation. Everything has been cleared. Self-defense ruling was unanimous. Good, she said, smiling. It was a friendly smile which somehow made it worse because now I knew exactly what she was capable of, and she was being nice about it. No hard feelings, I hope. I know this probably created a lot of paperwork. Some paperwork, yes, I said, which was an understatement of cosmic proportions. Can I ask you something, off the record? Sure. That whole situation back there, the 7 Corthians. Was that for you? Was that difficult? Mara actually laughed. Difficult? No, not really. Little bit of a workout maybe. Honestly, it was nothing compared to rush hour on Earth. You ever try to get on a subway train in New Shanghai during peak commute time? Now that requires combat skills. She said it like a joke, but I had done my research now. I knew that Earth cities had populations in the tens of millions packed into relatively small areas. I knew that humans competed for space on public transportation. I knew that they did this twice per day, every day, as a normal part of their routine existence. You are saying that your daily commute is more dangerous than fighting 7 armed enforcers? I asked. More chaotic anyway, she said. At least with enforcers, they follow predictable attack patterns. Commuters are wild cards, and they are trying to get to work on time, which is a level of motivation you cannot really defend against. The other humans were nodding, agreeing, like this was completely normal. Well, I said, because I could not think of anything else to say. I hope the rest of your visit to Harmony Point is less eventful. Me too, Mara said. I just wanted to buy a ship component. Maybe get some food that is not recycled protein paste. Simple vacation stuff. She finished her toxic coffee, stood up, shook my hand with a grip that was carefully calibrated to be friendly rather than threatening, but that still made my bones creak, and headed toward her departure gate with her fellow humans. I watched them go, this group of bipedal Deathworlders who fought each other for fun, who drank poison for breakfast, who considered fighting through crowds of their own species twice per day to be normal, and who were simultaneously the friendliest tourists the collective had ever encountered. Van appeared beside me, his scales a thoughtful purple now. So, he said, what did we learn today? I thought about it for a moment. About Mara's calm expression. About the 3-second dismantling of 7 trained fighters. About the boxing championship shirt. About rush hour on Earth being described as more dangerous than actual combat. We learned, I said slowly, that humans are extremely nice right up until the moment they are not, and that the transition between those 2 states happens faster than most species can perceive, let alone react to. Anything else? Yes, never, under any circumstances, threaten a human. And if you absolutely must threaten a human, make sure you read their shirt first. Ven's scales flickered with something that might have been amusement. That seems like solid advice. We stood there for a while watching the departure boards cycle through destinations. Human colonies were spreading throughout this entire sector now, more of them arriving every cycle. Friendly, curious, enthusiastic, terrifying. Ven, I said, I think I need to update my resume. Add a new skill. What skill? Reading human clothing for threat assessment purposes. He actually laughed at that. A sound like stones rolling down a hillside. And somewhere in the distance, the next human transport ship was requesting docking clearance. I went back to work.